People usually run from the rain. They see dark clouds gathering over the mountain peaks, and they turn back. They want dry socks. They want clear views. But I have always loved the storms. There is something protective about a heavy downpour. It washes the world clean. It drowns out the noise. It hides you. On the afternoon of September 15th, I found a trail that wasn't on the map. It wound its way up into the granite peaks of the Cascades. It was a beautiful path until it stopped. It didn't end at a viewpoint. It ended at a nest. And if the sky hadn't opened up at that exact moment, if the thunder hadn't shaken the ground, I don't think I would be sitting here today, holding this warm cup of coffee, listening to the water hit the roof. Let me tell you how the bad weather saved my life. There is a specific kind of silence that happens before a storm. It is not an empty silence. It is a heavy silence. The air pressure drops. The birds stop singing. The leaves on the maple trees turn their undersides up, showing their pale silver bellies to the sky. Most people feel this silence and they feel anxiety. They look at the darkening horizon and they think of wet socks. They think of cold fingers. They think of danger. But I have always loved it. To me, a storm is not a threat. It is a blanket. When the rain falls, the world gets smaller. The horizon shrinks to a circle of gray mist around you. The noise of the city, the noise of the internet, the noise of other people, it all gets washed away. It is just you and the water and the rhythmic drumming on the hood of your jacket. It is the ultimate privacy. On the morning of September 15th, I woke up to the sound of wind rattling my bedroom window. I looked at the weather app on my phone. A massive low-pressure system was moving in from the Pacific Ocean. 100% chance of precipitation. Wind gusts up to 40 miles per hour. Flood warnings for the lowlands. It was perfect hiking weather. I got out of bed. The floor was cold. I went to the kitchen and started the kettle. While the water boiled, I began to pack for a fair weather hiker. Packing is a chore. For me, it is a ritual. It is a tactile pleasure. I laid out my gear on the wooden table. First, the base layers. Merino wool, 200 weight, soft against the skin, warm even when wet. Then, the mid-layer, a fleece pullover, synthetic, breathable. And finally, the armor. My hard shell jacket, 3 layers of Gore-Tex Pro, bright orange. I ran my hand over the fabric. It was stiff, crinkly. It sounded like paper. It was my portable house. My shield against the elements. The kettle whistled. I poured the boiling water into my thermos. 32 ounces of Earl Grey tea. 2 bags, no sugar. I screwed the lid on tight. I felt the heat radiating through the metal. It was a promise of warmth for later. I put the thermos in the side pocket of my backpack. I added a first aid kit, a headlamp with fresh batteries, a map of the Central Cascades, a compass. I zipped the bag shut. The sound was final. I was ready. I drove east on Highway 2. The traffic was light. Who else would be driving into the mountains on a day like this? The further I drove, the darker the sky became. The clouds were not white fluffy sheep. They were bruises, dark purple, charcoal gray, almost black at the bottom. They hung low over the peaks, scraping the tops of the fir trees. My windshield wipers worked in a hypnotic rhythm. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the tires singing on the wet asphalt. I passed the town of Gold Bar, past the town of Skycomish. The houses disappeared. The power lines disappeared. The road began to climb. 2,000 feet elevation, 3,000 feet. The rain turned from a drizzle into a steady shower. I turned off the main highway onto a gravel service road. Forest Service Road 6024. The tires crunched on the wet stones. The car bounced over potholes filled with brown water. This was the edge of the wilderness. The trees here were giants. Douglas firs that were 5 feet thick. Western red cedars draped in long strands of lichen. The forest was dark green and brown, a monochrome world. I drove for 6 miles. The road ended at a small turnaround. There were no other cars, no rangers, no tourists, just a wooden signpost leaning at an angle. Iron Goat Trailhead. I put the car in park. I killed the engine. The silence rushed in. And then I heard it. The roar of the wind in the canopy above. It sounded like the ocean. And the of raindrops hitting the roof of my Subaru. I sat there for a moment, just breathing. The air inside the car was warm. The air outside was cold. I was in a bubble. But I hadn't come here to sit in a car. I opened the door. The cold air hit me. It smelled of ozone, of wet earth, of pine needles that had been fermenting for decades. It smelled like life. I stepped out. My boots sank into the mud. I pulled my hood up. I zipped my jacket all the way to my chin. I put on my gloves. I locked the car. I looked at the trail. It was a narrow, dark tunnel leading into the trees. It looked inviting. It looked like a secret. I took a deep breath of the charged air, and I began to walk. The Iron Goat Trail is well known. It is a wide path, an old railroad grade. It is flat, predictable, safe. I walked for 2 miles. My pace was steady. Left foot, right foot. My trekking poles clicked against the rocks. The rain was falling straight down now. A vertical curtain of water. It hit the canopy of the hemlock trees 100 feet above me. It filtered down as a fine mist. It collected on the tips of the sword ferns. It dripped onto my shoulders. I was warm inside my shell. I could feel the heat of my own body trapped in the fleece layer. It was a cozy feeling, like being in a sleeping bag while walking. I passed the old concrete snow sheds, relics of the Great Northern Railway. They looked like tombs, gray, cold, covered in graffiti. I didn't stop. I wanted to go higher, into the cloud layer. At mile 3, I saw it. It wasn't a marked junction. It wasn't even a proper trailhead. It was just a gap in the wall of ferns on the right side of the path. Most people would have walked past it. Most people are looking at their feet, trying to avoid the puddles. But I was looking at the forest. I stopped. I wiped the water from my glasses. I peered into the gap. It was a trail, narrow, overgrown, but definitely a trail. The ground was compacted. The branches had been cut back a long time ago. It wound its way up the steep slope, disappearing into a thick stand of cedar trees. It looked like a tunnel, a dark, green throat. I felt a pull, a magnetic attraction. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my phone. I opened the topographic map app. The screen glowed blue in the dim light. I waited for the GPS to lock. A blue dot appeared on the screen. It showed me standing on the Iron Goat Trail. But where the gap was, the map showed nothing, just contour lines, steep contour lines, no black dashed line, no name, no Sector 4. It was blank space. Terra incognita. I looked at the main trail. It continued straight, boring, flat. I looked at the gap. It went up, into the mist. Why do we choose the unknown? Is it bravery, or is it boredom, or is it something else? Maybe the rain makes us reckless. Maybe the sound of the water drowns out the voice of caution. I put the phone away. I adjusted my pack. I stepped off the gravel. My boot landed on soft pine needles. Silence. The crunch of the gravel was gone. The path was silent, dampened. I pushed through a wet branch of a maple tree. It brushed against my face. Cold. Wet. I shivered, but it was a good shiver. I was off the map. I was alone, and the rain seemed to fall a little harder. The path went up. It did not switch back. It did not meander. It climbed straight up the spine of the ridge. The grade was steep, maybe 40 degrees. My boots dug into the soft mud. I engaged four-wheel drive, my trekking poles planted firmly, my legs pushed. I could feel the heat building up inside my jacket. The Gore-Tex shell is a miracle of engineering. It keeps the water out, but it traps the heat in. I reached under my arms. I unzipped the ventilation zips, the pit zips. Cool air rushed in. It felt like a splash of cold water on my ribs. Relief. I checked my altimeter watch. 3,500 feet. I had climbed 1,000 feet in 45 minutes. The vegetation was changing. The giant cedars were gone. Now, it was silver fir and mountain hemlock. The trees were shorter, stunted by the wind, twisted by the snow load. They looked like old men hunched over in the rain. And the rain, it was different here. Down in the valley, it was a shower. Up here, inside the cloud, it was a soak. The air itself was water. Visibility dropped to 50 feet, then 30 feet, then 10 feet. I was walking in a white room with no walls and no ceiling. I stopped to catch my breath. I leaned on my poles. And that is when I felt it, the pressure. It wasn't just the altitude. My ears popped. I swallowed to clear them, but the pressure remained. It felt heavy, like a weight pressing on the back of my neck. I looked at the barometer on my wrist. The graph was a steep downward slope, 29.5 inches of mercury, 29.4. The storm cell was right on top of me, the center of the low-pressure system. I should have turned back. Logic said, turn back. Survival instinct said, turn back. But curiosity, that dangerous little voice, said, quote, 4, quote, 5. I took a drink from my water bottle. I listened. The wind had died down. The roar of the canopy was gone. It was dead silent. No birds, no squirrels, no wind, just the hiss of the rain hitting the granite rocks. And then, a sound that I felt in my chest before I heard it with my ears. A low, rolling vibration. It started in the west, deep, subsonic. It rolled across the sky like a giant stone wheel. It shook the ground under my boots. Thunder. Not the sharp crack of a nearby strike, but the long, deep groan of the mountains shifting. The air tasted metallic. Copper. Ozone. The hair on my arm stood up inside my fleece. Static electricity. The atmosphere was charging. The battery was full. And I was the only vertical object on the ridge. I looked up at the gray void. Quote 6, I whispered. My voice was swallowed instantly by the fog. I adjusted my hood. I pulled the drawstrings tight. I lowered my head. And I walked into the cloud. The trail did not fade away. Usually, game trails peter out. They split into 10 different directions as the deer scatter to feed. But this trail remained focused. It was cut into the scree slope. Stones had been moved. Large stones. Rocks weighing 50 pounds had been stacked to form a retaining wall. This was not an animal path. This was engineering. I walked for another 20 minutes. The trees were gone now. I was in the alpine zone. Just gray rock, patches of dirty snow, and the relentless rain. The clouds were so low I could reach up and touch them. They swirled around me like ghosts. And then, the trail stopped. It didn't end at a view. It didn't end at a summit. It ended at a wall, a vertical face of granite, rising 100 feet into the mist. A dead end, a box canyon. I stood there, confused. Why build a trail to nowhere? I wiped the water from my eyes. I looked closer at the base of the cliff. There was an overhang, a shallow cave, carved out by wind and ice over 10,000 years. It was dry underneath, a dark mouth protected from the storm. My instinct was to go inside, to get out of the rain, to drink some tea. I took a step forward, and then I stopped. My boots froze in the gravel, because the cave wasn't empty. It is hard to describe what I saw. My brain tried to categorize it. Pile of wood, debris, beaver dam. But it wasn't a dam, it was a structure. It was a nest, but it was huge. It was 6 feet high and 10 feet wide. It was made of black, wet branches, hemlock and cedar, but they weren't just piled up. They were woven, like a basket. The thick branches formed the frame. The thin branches formed the walls, and woven into the wood were the bones, white, bleached, clean. I saw the curve of a rib cage, an elk or a deer. I saw the long, heavy bone of a femur. I saw a skull, antlers facing outward, like a warning. It was symmetrical. That was the part that made my stomach turn. Nature is messy. Nature is chaotic. This was precise. Every bone was placed with intent. Every branch was snapped to a specific length. It was architecture. It was art. I stood 10 feet away. The rain was pounding on my hood. But under the overhang, it was dry and quiet. I could smell it now. The wind shifted. It didn't smell like a dead animal. It smelled like musk, like wet fur, like old leather, and, faintly, like ozone. I should have run. Any sane person would have turned around and ran down the mountain. But I was paralyzed. I was caught in the gravity of the thing. I took out my phone. I wanted to take a picture, to prove it was real. My fingers were cold, numb. I swiped up on the screen. The camera opened. I framed the shot. The black wood, the white bone, the gray stone. I tapped the shutter button, and in that split second of silence between the raindrops, I heard a sound from inside the structure, a shifting of weight, dry branches cracking under something heavy. The nest wasn't empty. The architect was home. The sound from the nest was not loud. It was the snap of a dry twig, but in the silence of the dead end, it sounded like a gunshot. I lowered the phone. My breath caught in my throat. Movement. Inside the dark weave of the branches, something shifted. It was black on black, shadow on shadow, but I saw the texture change. The smoothness of the bones was obscured by the roughness of fur or feathers. A shape detached itself from the back wall of the nest. It was tall. It unfolded itself. Joints popped, like old wood expanding in the heat. It stepped toward the opening of the cave. 1 step, 2 steps. I couldn't see a face. The overhang cast a deep shadow, but I saw the hand. It gripped the side of the nest, long, pale, with fingers that had too many knuckles. It was pulling itself out into the light. It was coming to inspect the intruder. I tried to step back. My boots were stuck in the wet gravel. I opened my mouth to scream, or to apologize, but the mountain screamed first. The thunder didn't roll. It exploded. It happened directly overhead. The sound wave hit me in the chest like a physical punch. It rattled my teeth. It vibrated my vision. And then, the sky tore open. It wasn't rain. It was a deluge, a cloudburst. Millions of gallons of water, held in suspension by the updraft, suddenly released all at once. It hit the ground with violence. Visibility dropped to 0. I was blind. The world turned into a gray waterfall. The noise was deafening. It was white noise amplified to 110 decibels. It drowned out my breathing. It drowned out my heartbeat. And it drowned out the creature. through the curtain of water. I saw the silhouette recoil. It hated the noise. It hated the water. The creature flinched. It covered its head with long, angular arms. It retreated back into the dry darkness of the nest. It sought shelter. It was an animal, and animals fear the storm. But I was already wet. I was already part of the storm. The rain was my camouflage. The thunder was my cover fire. I didn't think. I reacted. I turned around. I slipped. My boots lost traction on the slick granite. I fell hard. My knee hit a rock. Pain shot up my leg, but I didn't stop. I scrambled on all fours, crab walking through the mud. The water was running down the trail in a river, brown, foamy, cold. It washed away my footprints instantly. It washed away my scent. I stood up. I grabbed my trekking poles. I didn't look back at the nest. I looked down at the rushing water. "Go," I whispered. The wind howled in agreement, and I ran. I ran down the mountain, wrapped in the violent, beautiful embrace of the storm. The descent was a blur. I did not look back. I let gravity do the work. My boots slid on the mud. My trekking poles planted into the soft earth. The trail, the unmapped path, had turned into a stream. Brown water cascaded over my boots. It washed away my scent. It washed away my tracks. Nature was erasing the evidence of my trespass. I reached the junction with the Iron Goat Trail in 20 minutes. My feet hit the gravel, solid ground, known ground. I stopped for a second to listen. But I heard nothing except the roar of the wind and the hiss of the rain. The creature had not followed. It was a dry thing, a thing of dust and old bones. It would not leave its shelter to chase a ghost in a hurricane. I walked fast. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the cold. My fingers were numb inside my gloves. My Gore-Tex jacket was soaked through the outer layer. I needed warmth. I needed the box. I saw the trailhead sign first, leaning, gray, familiar, and then the car. My silver Subaru. It sat there in the rain like a spaceship, a pod of safety in a hostile world. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I fumbled with the keys. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped them in a puddle. I picked them up. Cold water ran down my sleeve. I pressed the unlock button. The lights flashed amber, a greeting. I pulled the handle. I threw my backpack onto the passenger seat, wet nylon against dry upholstery. I climbed into the driver's seat. I pulled the door shut. The world changed instantly. The roar of the storm was cut off. It was replaced by a muffled, rhythmic drumming on the roof. It was quiet. It was dry. I locked the doors. I sat there for a moment, dripping water onto the floor mat. I took a deep breath. The car smelled like stale coffee and old pine air freshener. It smelled like civilization. I put the key in the ignition. I turned it. The engine caught. The dashboard lit up. I reached for the climate control dials. Fan speed, maximum, temperature, high. The vents blasted hot air into the cabin. I felt the warmth hit my face. My frozen cheeks began to tingle. I peeled off my wet gloves. I threw them on the dashboard to dry. I unzipped my jacket. Steam began to rise from my fleece layer. I was safe. I looked out the windshield. The rain was coming down in sheets. It blurred the trees into green ghosts. I couldn't see the ridgeline. I couldn't see the nest. The storm had swallowed the mountain whole. I reached for the thermos in the side pocket of my pack. I unscrewed the lid. Steam rose from the opening. I poured the tea into the cup. Dark, amber, hot. I held the cup in both hands, letting the heat soak into my palms. I took a sip. Earl Grey, bergamot, sugar. It tasted like life. I leaned back in the seat. I listen to the rain. Usually, people say the rain is depressing. They say it ruins a good day, but they don't. Understand, the rain is a wall. It keeps the hikers away. It keeps the tourists away. And tonight, it kept the monsters away. The creature up there, the architect in its nest. It is trapped by the weather. It is cowering in its cave, waiting for the sun. But I am here, inside the machine, warm, protected. I took another sip of tea. I watched a single drop of water roll down the glass, tracing a path that wasn't on any map. I turned on the radio, low volume, classical music, violins mixed with the sound of the thunder. I smiled. Let it rain. Let it pour. I'm not going anywhere until the cup is empty.